Welcome to Brian's Vinyl Records. I'm your host, Brian, and this is a podcast for all things vinyl records, music, and more. Today, I'm excited to have my longtime podcast partner and co-host of the upcoming Tracks series of episodes, Jay from Time Out Need More Popcorn, located at timeoutneedmorepopcorn.com. Welcome to the show, Jay.
Hey, Brian. Glad to be on here, man, and thanks for having me on, and thanks for coming on the first episode of Time Out Need More Popcorn.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Of course, today the topic is movie soundtracks, and is a tie-in, as Jay said, to an episode we did for his podcast, Time Out Need More Popcorn, about music movies, or movies about music. So that was a fun episode. We had a good time with that, and I hope that we're going to have a great time with this topic as well. Movie soundtracks are something that I think a lot of people often might overlook when they're looking for great compilations, but you can find some great music on movie soundtracks.
I think there was a time period, particularly in our lives, for about 10 years where like the soundtrack was almost as important as the movie, and sometimes would outdo the movie. You know, like the soundtrack was a bigger deal. And then, like, I don't know, we got to a point in the 90s and later on into the 2000s, like with licensing and stuff, where it, like, you have soundtracks, but then you have soundtracks that come out that are like music inspired by the movie, and you realize that song played like halfway through the end credits, you know, or it wasn't in the movie and stuff. Right. So I'm excited to talk about this too, man, because I tried to pick out some gems from, you know, I'm a big soundtrack nut. I love my good soundtrack. I'm trying to pick out some from the past here that I hope you didn't have on your list, but even if you did, we can talk about them nonetheless.
Well, I'm thinking that for sure my list is going to differ from yours. I don't have too much worry there, but let me give a little overview of what we did here. Jay and I have compiled a list of 3 movie soundtracks, a little larger list than that, but we're going to give you 3 movie soundtracks that we think every music fan should have in their personal collections. We have not shared what soundtracks we've picked with each other, so they're going to come blind to us. We may or may not know the soundtrack, actually, that we're going to throw at each other. I think it's going to be fun that way because we'll get real-time reactions to the soundtracks that we lay out to each other. Any soundtrack is available to be used, whether it's orchestral, popular artists, soundtracks, anything like that. So we just wanted to go out and pick what we really liked for music soundtracks and then talk about maybe a little bit about why. That's kind of what we're doing today. Without further ado, Jay, you're the guest. You go ahead and give me your first essential movie soundtrack.
Well, mine are going to go in order that they came into existence. All right. This one's from 1984. It's a movie starring this guy, I don't know, you may have heard of him, called Kevin Bacon. I don't know, he's been in some stuff. It's a little movie called Footloose. All right. And now what's funny to me about this is for years, Bacon hated the fact that he was known for this, and now like he has so leaned into it that he has a band with his brother and they just play the Footloose song. But the soundtrack to this, Brian, I saw this movie when I was a kid with my mother because she was really into music, and she thought she was a big John Travolta fan, so dancing movies were kind of a thing for her, even though we weren't allowed to dance, so you know, figure that out. But whatever. So we went and saw this, and then we bought the soundtrack, like the tape of it, and she and I like wore it out listening to it. But the song listed on this is amazing. You got Footloose by Kenny Loggins on it, which is just a catchy tune if you hear it. Let's Hear It for the Boy from Denise Williams. Almost Paradise. You got Ann Wilson and Mike Reno, you know, singing together, which is a killer ballad from the 80s. I think power ballads are sort of built around that and a lot of what Def Leppard did. Holding Out for a Hero by Bonnie Tyler, Dancing in the Sheets by Shalimar. I mean, Heaven Helps the Man, which is I'm Free, which is the Kenny Loggins song. And you've got a killer Sammy Hagar song called The Girl Gets Around. I mean, you know, there's a couple other tunes on there too, but they weren't hits. But listen to that lineup, man. I mean, that's 10 songs of greatness. That doesn't even include the fact that it had, like the 15th anniversary edition that came out in the 90s, put Mental Health, Bang Your Head from Quiet Riot on there, and Hurt So Good from John Mellencamp on there, because those were their songs in the movie. But the ones that were built around the movie, and really the movie is built around all of the songs. Like each of those songs is a distinct scene. Like if we were doing the old film strip movie reviews, I would have just done the outline around when those songs play, because they all happen at like key moments in the plot. So if you're a kid of the 80s, all right, and you haven't revisited this recently, what are you waiting for? But even if you're not, and you just like good pop music, pop rock music from the 1980s, Footloose is a must-have soundtrack. And I have a friend who has the vinyl of this, and he says it's even more amazing in that format. So I don't care if you got it on MP3, you got it on a cassette, whatever. This is definitely one to have in your collection. The Footloose original motion picture soundtrack.
I am so glad that you picked this one. The reason is I recently got this album on vinyl for 99 cents.
Amazing.
Still sealed. Still sealed. I cracked that bad boy open and played it, and I will attest to your friend's statement. It sounds awesome on vinyl, and it's one of those soundtracks that I think every music fan should have. I mean, it's that good, and everybody knows, like you said, Footloose, but you went down the list there. Though there are hit after hit after hit on that soundtrack, and it produced a great compilation of songs, and I love having it in my collection. So yes, I have it on vinyl, and it does sound really good.
All right, so I took us dancing with Footloose, Brian. Where are you taking us for your first must-have soundtrack?
I'm going Metalhead here.
Awesome.
So I went with 1993's very poor movie but amazing soundtrack to Last Action Hero.
Oh, wow.
This soundtrack is unbelievable. You're talking AC/DC's Big Gun, Alice in Chains, Megadeth, Queensryche, Def Leppard's huge hit Two Steps Behind is on here. Anthrax, Dream On by Aerosmith, Cypress Hill, who was a big-time rap act at the time, Fishbone, and Tesla, all on one album. This is like a metalhead's like heaven album. The movie leaves something to be desired, I think we could say, honestly. I don't mind the movie, and actually will pop it in from time to time just to watch, but the soundtrack is that good. It peaked at number 7 on the Billboard Top 200 in 1993, and the first single off it was the AC/DC track. So just an awesome soundtrack. It's one of my all-time favorites, and one I sadly do not have currently on vinyl because it's so hard to get, and it costs a pretty penny to get one.
See, this is funny that you brought this one up. I was so glad you went hard rocking like this in this one. And what better than a Schwarzenegger flick, right? I have a real mixed history with Last Action Hero because when I first saw it, I loved it. And then a few years later, I was like, this is kind of stupid. And I hated it. And I hated on it for probably a decade and a half. I've actually come to appreciate what it's trying to do, and it fails. All right, in its goal. But the thing I remember is that soundtrack, and particularly Big Gun by AC/DC, because that's kind of the Jack Slater theme. That Angus Young, that ripping guitar stuff that he does, it's hard to not think about that. And what's weird is that, for me, is that Def Leppard did an acoustic song, and it was like one of these massive hits, you know, and it sounds nothing like anything else they ever did, really. But I remember when it came out, I was like, is Def Leppard going acoustic now? And come to find out, there's 2 versions of the song, and I happen to like the electric version personally, but I love that song. But it's so good. But you're right, man. What a collection of like hard rocking, or more like hard hitting music from the early 90s. I mean, you get Cypress Hill in there, you got Megadeth, then you even got bands like Tesla. Tesla's sort of an underappreciated band. They came out in the wrong time. They came out at a time when you're supposed to have like all this friggin' hair and stuff, and if they would have just been like the blues rock band they are, and the heavy hitting band they are, I think they'd be even more appreciated than they are today. And they've got one of the best two-fisted guitar punches ever. In those two guys. So
yes.
Frankie Hannon and Tom Skeoch were amazing together, and I know they're not together anymore, but they were amazing players together. But that album, that's a great pull, man, because I hadn't thought about that one in a long time, but I had the cassette tape to it. I remember
me too.
burning it up in my little vehicles in high school and stuff. Movie, again, mixed bag. Soundtrack, number 1. So Last Action is good. I find it interesting that it's so darn hard to find in vinyl, but you can get the Footloose soundtrack loaded with hits for 99 cents.
Well, I mean, you got to remember too that by 1993, vinyl sales in the United States were going on a decline.
True,
CDs were taking over.
You're right,
and they just weren't pressing a whole lot of vinyl in the States. So you could find European copies, but again, like I said, to get them, number 1, you're going to pay up the nose for shipping, and then plus the cost of an album that's not very easy to find. So
true,
it's just one of those that's eluded, and hopefully one day they'll re-release it. They've been doing a lot of soundtrack re-releases over the last few years, so I got my fingers crossed that this is one that comes out, you know, all that kind of stuff. So yeah,
very cool, very cool.
All right, Jay, what do you got for number 2?
Well, this one's a big one for me because it ties into my brother. And if people read the Hysteria blog where we did the tracks thing, I talked a lot about my brother kind of introduced me to Def Leppard. He also would take me to movies in the 1980s, and he took me to see this movie that I probably shouldn't have been seeing because at the time I was like 10. They were actually 9 years old when this came out, so there's stuff in it that I didn't need to be watching. But he had the LP, the soundtrack to it, and he still got it, Brian. And by the way, I cannot get it from him. So I was going to get it and try to get it for you. But he still got it. I'm talking about 1986's Tom Cruise star vehicle launching classic Top Gun. All right, now we're seeing a little theme here. I'm not a Kenny Loggins whore, I promise. He just happens to wind up on two of these soundtracks. What I love about this is they wrote Danger Zone, the song, and they brought Kenny Loggins in to do the scratch vocal on it so they could pitch it to bands to try to do it like he was singing it. When finally somebody realized, why don't we just let Kenny do it? Because he's singing his ass off on it. And it is one of the best opening things ever because you have the Top Gun anthem, which is Harold Faltermeyer and Steve Stevens. You have this great guitar with this huge synthesizer and all this stuff on the aircraft carrier, and it breaks right into the kick of Danger Zone, which is just a jamming song. You want to do a good workout song, it still works. All these years later, 33 years later. But you've also got Mighty Wings by Cheap Trick. I love Cheap Trick. One of my favorite 80s bands. You got Playing with the Boys, which is known for that stupid volleyball scene or whatever, but it's a great Kenny Loggins song. It's really more like what he used to do. You've also got the song that totally ruined a band, Take My Breath Away by Berlin. Like, it completely destroyed them, but it's their biggest hit, so they have to do it. You get the Miami Sound Machine on there. You got Loverboy on there. We were talking about Mike Reno last time. I remember playing the stew out of this record on my brother's hi-fi system. And when I was home at the holidays, I broke it out and played it again because I just had to hear it. If you don't have the Top Gun soundtrack in your life, people, you need this. This is like great workout music. If you like to work out, like to run, do something like that, this is great music to just go to. You can't really veg to this music because this music demands that you get up and do things like fly jets at 100,000 miles an hour and shoot things. That's what this music is. I remember playing the Top Gun video game on an IBM PC Junior or something and listening to this soundtrack in the background. It's just part of my life and it has been forever, and it should definitely be a part of other people's too. So Top Gun, the soundtrack.
Not much more I can add to that. I mean, it is a fantastic soundtrack. I am one of the few people who do not like this movie. But the soundtrack has always been top notch. I do not own the soundtrack, but it is available and it isn't expensive. You can get it from Amazon or your local store, so it is stocked. But it is one that I do need to eventually wind up with because it is that good. And I know I just shocked you with my admission that I do not like Top Gun.
No, it's okay. We're gonna work on this. So someday.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
It's just not my thing. All right, my number 2 that I'm gonna go with here is kind of a 180 from my heavy metal infused, and I'm going with 1998, a movie starring one of my favorite comedians, Adam Sandler. This is the Wedding Singer soundtrack.
Oh, wow.
This is 80s heaven music right here. If you're a fan of 80s pop music, there's no better soundtrack for you to own than the Wedding Singer. We're talking about, you name it, it's on here. You got the Culture Club, right? You got the Police, the Smiths, the Psychedelic Furs, Billy Idol, David Bowie, Elvis Costello. And then, of course, the presidents of the United States. They're on the soundtrack. It is just awesome. And if you haven't seen the movie, I highly recommend going out of your way to see the movie because it's a very fun take on a guy who's a wedding singer who's going through some rough times and trying to get through that. Just a fantastic movie, and the soundtrack is top notch.
That's definitely that's one of those. People act like Hollywood has just now gotten into nostalgia. Not even close. They are all about nostalgia, and they always have been. And this movie hits all of those sweet spots. But you're right. If you like 80s music, or you think you like 80s music, this is like a collection of it, just waiting for you right there. So it's a fantastic soundtrack. I agree. I can't have much more time. I love that movie too. It's stupid and cheesy, and I don't even like Adam Sandler, but I like that movie.
All right, Jay, what do you have now for your next and final pick?
Well, this one came out last year, and I'm going a really different direction on this one. this one's not one that's got words, it's not pop songs, but it is a soundtrack by a master of movie soundtracks, and it's some of the best work he's ever done. In fact, it's great because it's him coming back to something that made him famous to begin with. I'm talking about John Carpenter's soundtrack to the 2018 version of Halloween. He did it with his son and Daniel Davies, their frequent musical partner. They recorded it together, and it's variations on the things, if you've seen the Halloween movie and the Halloween theme, that you know it's a lot of new stuff. But Carpenter is one of the best synth producers to ever grab a hold of one, in my opinion. And he knows how to weave it together with great rock guitar and beats. And it's another one of those soundtracks that tells the story of the movie, and you don't even have to see the movie. I bought the soundtrack to this a week before the movie came out, Brian. All right.
Yeah.
Because I had heard so much about it. I'd heard little snips of it, and I said, I got to have this. And it's 21 songs. It's 43 minutes. And if you read the titles of them, it'll lead you right through the plot too. So that was, I was like, well, whatever. I don't care. I wanted to see it anyway. And I'll be honest with you, I don't really like the movie, and I'm a big Halloween movie fan. You know this, but I didn't really care for the movie, but I love the soundtrack. I still listen to it. Like, it is just cool music to have in the background. Like when I'm grinding on something at work and I'm just trying to really concentrate on what I'm doing or whatever, I'll throw this on and it just works. And I know that's kind of weird, morbid, because it's a movie about a vicious serial killer or whatever, but the music to this is amazing. And again, if you like mood music and you like EDM and stuff like that, this is a little break from the rock stuff I've thrown at you, particularly the 80s rock stuff. This is a different one, but it's something you should lay on your ears. Listen to it on Spotify once and see if you like it. I think you find something you dig on it. So I'm going to put the 2018 Halloween soundtrack out there, man.
I like it. I mean, you sent this to me immediately after you first listened to it. I remember this. And I looked it up on my Amazon Music account and listened to the whole thing right then. I mean, I literally popped my earbuds in and listened to the whole thing while doing other work around the house. It was fantastic. It's a great soundtrack. And for vinyl fans, they released it on a nice, cool pumpkin orange vinyl. And you could still find it. They did a small amount, but you could still find it, I think, on even Amazon. And I know my local record stores in town still has copies available for sale. And it's just one of those that I just haven't purchased yet, but I need to go out and get, because I, like you, I really enjoyed listening to it. It's just fantastic music. You keep the themes of the original Halloween, the noises that they do, then build upon that. And it's not even like it's extremely scary type music, but it's good suspenseful music and just really good music. Great to have on the background. And so I agree with you. That's a really good soundtrack. And I was tempted to put on some of those type of soundtracks too, but my list is so big on soundtracks with just music. I just couldn't, I was thinking Superman, great soundtrack.
Yeah.
The Star Wars, obviously, great soundtracks.
I mean, I'm sitting here, I'm talking about John Carpenter, and I'm like, I just totally jumped on John Williams is not his grave. But yeah, I mean, yeah, he's got so many, the Jaws soundtrack, all the things he's done through the years. As a matter of fact, I re-listened to Duel of the Fates from The Phantom Menace, which is really the only thing you should ever keep from The Phantom Menace, in my opinion, with John Williams. But yeah, I wanted something that was not just song-based, because we talked about this, and I was like, I can't talk about soundtracks without talking about like an actual soundtrack to a movie, and that one is so iconic. I mean, it was either that or, Brian, I was going to bring out the Dream Warrior soundtrack, and I know how you feel about Dokken.
Oh, come on now. We don't need to talk about Dokken and my feelings on Dokken, because there's a lot of people who probably really like Dokken that listen to this, and I don't want to crap on them. So we won't. But yeah, I thought about that too, and going with some scores. There's some really good scores out there. But there's just too many really good soundtracks that I couldn't narrow them down. So I have to pick my last pick, and it's just kind of throwing a dart at a wall here, because all three of the ones that I have left, or four of them, are so good. But I'm going to take you out and bring you back to 1992 to a soundtrack that really, I think, kicked off the fascination with Bohemian Rhapsody to begin with, and that's Wayne's World soundtrack. Oh. The Wayne's World soundtrack is absolutely fantastic. Even if you don't like Bohemian Rhapsody or Queen, the rest of that album is fire. You've got Cinderella, Hot and Bothered on there, which is a fantastic song that was just after, the grunge era took over. So it was released on their 1994 album eventually. The Bullet Boys, Red Hot Chili Peppers, Black Sabbath with Dio doing Time Machine is fantastic. Jimi Hendrix is on there, obviously, doing Foxy Lady. You got Alice Cooper doing Feed My Frankenstein, which is a fantastic song. Yeah. If you love good innuendo song, that's a great one for you right there. Eric Clapton is on this soundtrack. Soundgarden is on the soundtrack. And a little known band who is one of my favorites is a band called Rhino Bucket. And they're like an AC/DC band. The singer sounds like Bon Scott, and the music sounds like AC/DC from the 70s. It's fantastic stuff. This soundtrack is awesome. And just a sideway into a story here. This soundtrack on vinyl was released a couple years ago as a special limited edition release. And that was probably the only way you could get it on vinyl. And I just so happened to decide one day when I had the day off to take a drive out to a city that's probably about a 15-20 minute drive from my house and try a local Barnes & Noble to see what they have in stock for vinyl, because the one I go to typically, I had been there recently and looked through all their vinyl, so I just wanted to see if I could find anything at this store. And I dug through everything. Like, I literally dug through every vinyl that they had there, and lo and behold, in the very last row of vinyl that I got to, the second to last vinyl in there, I flipped over, and there's the Wayne's World soundtrack. And I nearly lost myself right there. I was like, no way is this just sitting here, because it shouldn't be. It's Barnes & Noble, but why would they have an album that was released 2-3 years ago sitting in their inventory? And there it was. So I took the album that I was going to get, put it back, and picked that one up and bought that that day and brought it home, and it is absolutely fantastic. One of my favorite soundtracks to be released. And that's saying a lot, because there's some on this list that I'll get to after we're done here that are awesome too. But this one I wanted to call out because I really love having the Black Sabbath song with Dio, because there's another album that came off of that is very difficult to get. And of course the Rhino Bucket, which is very hard to get as well, are two of my favorite songs. So that is my list. That's my finale.
That's a good one to pick, man. I'm not a fan of the Wayne's World movie. Don't care for that at all, but I do remember that soundtrack. And I remember, I've joked often that, like, the reason Queen is still a big deal in America is because that stupid soundtrack. And that's not true at all, but it's what I like to say about it. But it did introduce Bohemian Rhapsody to a generation of people that may not have known what it was.
Oh, sure.
I mean, completely. Mm-hmm. The video of them lip syncing it in the car and all that stuff. But I remember all the other songs off of it too. I mean, say what you will about that, Dana Carvey, Mike Myers have taste in music that tend to line up with a lot of the stuff I like too. And so, yeah, I mean, though I didn't care for the Wayne's World shtick or whatever, I liked the soundtrack. I liked the song. And I'm glad you mentioned Cinderella's another band, kind of like Tesla, that came out at the wrong time, or was in the wrong era, but they're a killer band. And Tom Kiefer's an unbelievable vocalist and guitar player. So I'm glad you mentioned that one. That's a cool one to throw on, man. I hadn't thought about that one in a long time. I don't have to go try to spool it up now. It's if I can find it on Spotify or something to listen to it.
Well worth it. Sold over 2 million and was number 1 on the Billboard charts.
That's another hallmark of great soundtracks. They chart and stay on charts for decades, at times. And that one's one that a lot of people will remember. So very cool. I'm curious what you left off your list, man.
Oh, do you have any that you want to mention that you left off?
Yeah, well, I mean, I could have continued my 80s tour de force with the Rocky IV soundtrack. I happen to love a lot of those songs, the Survivor songs in particular. I know, but I love that movie, and I love the soundtrack to that movie because I wore that one out. And so a little Charlie Sheen movie called The Wraith, kind of a weird, I don't know, sci-fi horror flick, but the 80s metal on that, man. You got Ozzy, you got Motley Crue. There's some good songs on that record. So I recommend the Wraith soundtrack if you can lay your hands on it anywhere. Those were two other ones I kind of had in the hopper, but I decided to go John Carpenter and Halloween.
I will say that the Wraith vinyl is not easy to get, but it is out there. I have seen it a couple times, but, very expensive.
I will let my favorite Ozzy solo song is on that, Secret Loser. Love that song. Love everything about
interesting.
it. It's in a cool scene. Love that. I did have one other one too, and it's really off the path, but it ties into a little spoiler alert of one of the movies we talked about on my podcast, Pure Country. The Pure Country soundtrack is like one of the best George Strait albums ever. I mean, it's unbelievable. So, and it's a real variety for him. It's not stuff you would have expected from him in 1992, but it's another one I was going to bring up.
All right, Jay, my list here, I'm just going to go through this. Things that I left off that are some of my favorites. Singles soundtrack, obviously tops. If you're a big grunge era music or alternative rock guy, that is a must-have for alternative rock. Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, Mother Love Bone, Paul Westerberg, Mudhoney, The Screaming Trees, The Smashing Pumpkins, and even Jimi Hendrix on that one. Great. And there's an MOV Pressing, which is Music on Vinyl, which are a top-notch pressing company out there that you can get on vinyl, and it sounds awesome. Highly recommended on that one. The Crow soundtrack. Again, this is a interesting soundtrack as far as looking at the types of music on here. They have some Pantera on there, and Rollins Band, which is your hardcore metal. They've got The Cure, which is kind of your emo rock band. They've got Stone Temple Pilots. They've got Nine Inch Nails. They got the Violent Femmes and Rage Against the Machine on this. So it's a very eclectic soundtrack, but it's really good. American Pie.
Oh, man.
Phenomenal soundtrack. I just got this in the mail on vinyl picture disc, and I put it on, and it's fantastic. Highly recommend that one. And the last one I want to mention is new. 2014's Guardians of the Galaxy soundtrack.
That's a good one.
Number one on the Billboard Top 200. Was on the Billboard Top 200 for 16 weeks, 11 of them in a row, and has sold over 2 million copies in the U.S. alone. Awesome soundtrack. And the cool part about that one is if you get the deluxe version, you not only get the soundtrack, but you get the score as well. Very fun.
I want to jump in on your American Pie thing or whatever. That came out in 1999. That is some of the best collection of post-grunge, alt-rock 90s music you can find. You've got Sugar Ray on there. You got Blink-182. You got You Wanted More from Tonic, which is an amazing song. Got a song by a band that never went anywhere, Super Transatlantic, with a song called Super Down. I love that song. Still love that song to this day. You got Goldfinger on there, Shades Apart, Stranger by the Day. I saw them in concert, man, because I saw that movie. All right, and I knew that song off of it. I love the American Pie soundtrack. Just to pull back the curtain a little bit, there's a great lost episode of our old film strip podcast we did with our friend Anna about American Pie. That the audio, like we lost the file, something happened, we never missed it. But I don't think Brian and I have ever laughed more uncomfortably for 90 minutes ever doing a show, because Anna was way more candid about stuff than we thought she was going to be on that show. And it was amazing. So I wish it was somewhere I could actually point people to now, because it was a fun one. That soundtrack though, man, is unreal. And I think only maybe topped by the second one. I seem to remember the second one having just as good a set of songs.
Yeah, I don't think I've actually heard the American Pie 2 soundtrack, to be honest with you. I should look that up though. But I loved all three of the American Pie movies that they released with the main cast anyway.
Yeah.
I don't count the ones that they did as spin-offs. Those were not
that's
good, but
cashing in, yeah.
Yeah, the three that they did with the main cast, I think all three of them are great. Number two, man, there's some parts in there that are even funnier than the first one. But just all around great movies and just awesome music collection. Whoever curated the music for that movie did a phenomenal job.
Yeah, they really did. There's some good stuff on that one, definitely. I'll tell you one that it's kind of a guilty pleasure, but I still own it, and I had the cassette of it. The Scream 2 soundtrack is in that same vein of like that post-grunge alt rock thing of the 90s and early 2000s. It was loaded with stuff that I just loved on that. And I listen to some of it now and I'm like, oh, why did I like that? But at the time, man, I was wearing my flannel and staring at my hiking boots like everybody else and loved it. So
that's awesome.
Yep.
That's awesome. All right. Well, I think we got our list together and a couple extras for you. Those soundtracks, almost all of them, I think, are available on vinyl. Some of them in the used market, which is a little harder to get. But I'll throw a couple links up on my website, briansvinylrecords.com, if you're interested in checking out the soundtracks on vinyl. I'll throw up the links that I can find for some of the albums that we mentioned here. Obviously, some that you mentioned, Jay, you'll find copies of those fairly easily at your local record store in the used piles, which you'll get a very good deal on there. Like I said, I got mine in a used pile. for 99 cents off Footloose. I mean, you can't beat that. I picked it up and I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna take this home because 99 cents. I can't be wrong. I popped that on. I was like, damn, this is really good.
It is.
Yeah, so all sorts of things. So I'll post some links to some of the soundtracks that we mentioned here. If you want to purchase them from our site, that'd be great. That all goes through Amazon. Otherwise, hit your local store, call your store and see if they got them in stock or if they can get them for you, because these are great soundtracks that everyone I think should have in their collection, and almost all of them are available on vinyl in some way or fashion. So that's going to do it, I think, for today's show. So Jay, I want to thank you for coming on. This has been awesome, and I just want to mention again that Jay's podcast is located at timeoutneedmorepopcorn.com, and we did an episode on music related movies where music is the theme or underlying theme in a movie that I think you'll enjoy too. So please go check that out. Time Out Need More Popcorn is the podcast, and subscribe to that on iTunes or Stitcher or any of the other big podcast catching apps. You can get that there. So thank you, Jay, for joining me on this episode. I hope you had a good time.
Absolutely, man. Anytime, and looking forward to doing those tracks episodes that we talked about. And just let folks know, I post usually a couple of times a week on the Time Out Need More Popcorn website and blog. And the podcast comes out right now every couple of weeks. So all kinds of stuff coming up on that. But thanks for having me on again, Brian. I really enjoyed it.
It's been a pleasure, and so I'm glad you were able to do this. I think it's going to be great. I'm excited to listen to your podcast episodes. Jay and I had a lot of fun doing movie and television reviews for many, many years, so I'm glad you're back into this, and look forward to joining you again on your show and having you back for this one. Like I said, tracks will be coming up, and we'll be breaking down albums that we love, albums that we don't love in a track-by-track basis, and kind of getting into some of the things that we see as musicians and songwriters and producing and all that kind of stuff, as well as the content of the tracks themselves. So I'm really excited about that. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to Brian's Vinyl Records. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave us a review. This helps other people find the podcast. Check out my website, briansvinylrecords.com, for up-to-date vinyl info and my latest blogs. Once again, thank you for listening. Keep spinning.